Okay? So today, I want to give you one reason, one imperative, one passionate reason why you need to be a leader. Okay? And after we're done this story today, I want you to think in your heart, I will be a leader. I will never fail to bring leadership. Because the alternative is really sad, right? Whenever there's no leaders, it's really sad. And I want you to turn in your Bible to Judges chapter 19. And in verse 1 of chapter 19 of Judges, it says, "And it came to pass in those days when there was no king." Right? When there was no king. And it begins a story that carries on until the end of the book of Judges, about 3 or 4 chapters. And in the very last verse of the book of Judges, it says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." So this is a story that we're going to look at this morning that's sandwiched between two statements, the same statement made twice. There was no king, there was no leader. So what happens in this story happened because there was no leader. Okay, I want you to remember that, because a lot of times we look at things in the Bible and say, well, why would God let that happen? This makes no sense. And this story is very disturbing. It's a really, really disturbing story for me. And the reason that disturbing stories happen is because there's no leadership. That's why you want to be a leader. Not only for your own life, but for those in the rest of your family. So this could be a picture of a church without strong leadership. I can remember a church in my home city, the city where I was born in Canada, and I preached in that church for many years. Sweet, sweet people. And the leaders were, well, there was no leaders, actually. It was led by the congregation, because everybody hears from God and everybody knows, so, and they had what they called, the services were actually an open mic service. I'd come up and say something, you'd come up and say something, somebody else come up and say something. In the end, you just had this big mess. There was no continuity. It was very spiritual. And there's this idea that having no leaders somehow was a very honorable, godly way to do things, because nobody gets puffed up, nobody gets to be the boss. And in the kingdom, we're all servants, right? Well, the church doesn't exist today. Last time I went back to that church, it was actually a bit weird. We went there, and there was a service going on. It was a totally different church. And there was only one person there from the original church. And so that church doesn't exist today. And many times, I spoke with them, and I asked to speak to their leaders, their core people, and say, you guys have to have leadership. You have to have a leader. You can't go anywhere without a leader. And that's exactly what happens. And so when you look at people who are leaders and you think, why would I want to be a leader? And a lot of times people want to be a leader because maybe a position, notoriety, all the carnal things. But that's not why you want to be a leader. But it's also not why you don't want to be a leader. Okay? A lot of people say, I don't want to be a leader because I see carnality there. I see, abusive authority there. I see whatever it may be. So I don't want to be a leader. That's not a good enough reason. It doesn't hold water with God. He wants us to be leaders, not because we can be leaders, but because we can lead people into the way that they need to go. Everything that you do is going to be done through leading it, right? I mean, you guys know that. Every outreach we do, everything we do, there's got to be leaders. There's got to be somebody that says, hey, let's do this. And some of you are really good at that, and some of you need to step up a little more, because if there isn't leadership, then there's going to be eventual struggles in your life that you have a hard time sorting out. And I want you to look at this beginning. We're just going to go back and refer to the end of the book of Genesis, where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are done. And Jacob is what the Bible says pronouncing a blessing over the 12 tribes of Israel. And of course there was some adjustment in the tribes after that. But this is his kids. And he's pronouncing a blessing over them in Genesis chapter 40. He called his sons and he said, gather together that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days. And so he said, gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father. And he starts out, Reuben, you're my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. Unstable as water, you shall not excel, because you went up to your father's bed and you defiled it. Well, that's a blessing. Well, no, is it? I don't know. Listen, this is, maybe we shouldn't call it a blessing. Maybe we should call it a pronouncement. Israel made a pronouncement over his 12 sons, over each of his sons. He pronounced things that he said would befall you in the future. This is where you're headed, buddy. This is what I'm pronouncing over you. And he no doubt did it by the Spirit of God. But I want you to notice something, that what he pronounced was a result of their own choices. There was nobody that made Reuben defile his father's bed. That was his choice, and he ate the fruit of it. Okay, and so it went on, and it says, Simeon and Levi are brothers, instruments of cruelty are in their dwelling places. Let not my soul enter their counsel, and so on it goes. We're going to get to this story in the book of Judges, and it's a story that happens in the tribe of Benjamin. And so as we get down to Benjamin, who was the sweetest, littlest son of Israel, of Jacob. And in verse 27, here's the blessing pronounced over Benjamin. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he shall devour his prey. At night he shall divide the spoil. He was such a sweet, cute little viper. He was such a sweet. Even baby snakes are cute, aren't they? Well, compared to their mamas, they're a lot cuter. Baby animals are always cute. Right? Oh, so cute. And he was the baby of the family, and he was so cute. And this is the pronouncement over his life, is that he's a ravenous wolf. And you're not going to change your opinion, are you, Michelle? And he would devour his prey and divide his spoil. In other words, he was an attacker. He was a user, an abuser. Benjamin was. Took advantage of his youngest sibling benefits and turned them to his own selfishness. So, this story begins in Judges 19. And what happens is there's a Levite who's a priest, right? And he comes from the mountains of Ephraim to go to a town where he had, well, it says a concubine. Basically, in other places it says he was her husband. But he had taken this young woman as a wife anyway. And she had lived with him in the mountains of Ephraim for some time. And I think she got bored with it, and then she took off home. It said that she played the harlot, whether she had another boyfriend or what happened, I don't know. But she took off back home. And then he decided, after 4 months, to go get her. He took a servant and his donkeys, and off he went some day's journey to this woman's home. And her father-in-law was really happy to see the guy. I don't know if he'd never met him before or what, but anyway, he invited him in, and they started partying. And they were drinking something that made their heart merry that day. And then the next day he's going to leave, and the father-in-law says, no, stay, let's do this another day. This is a great time. We're having a great party. So he did that. He ends up 5 days partying. And then finally at noon, he says, I got to go. And the father-in-law says, you can't go now. You got to wait till next morning, because you won't get all the way home. You'll be stranded in the middle of no man's land. And so he said, no, I've got to go. Enough is enough. So he made the choice to take his little wife and his servant and his donkeys, and they headed out. And they came to 4 or 5 hours later, it's getting evening, and they've only come to cities that are not Israelite cities. And they don't want to stay there because they don't want to stay with strangers. Because Israel has a culture where you take your brothers in, right? So they decided to go on ahead, and they got to a city called Gibeah of Benjamin. Okay? They're going to stay with some Benjaminites tonight. And so they get to the city, and they sit down in the square, and nobody invites them to come to their house. I don't know why, just a very unfriendly city, I guess. So they're sitting there in the square. The sun's gone down, and this old guy comes in from the farm, and he says, "Hey, who are you?" And the guy says, "Oh, I'm Bob. I'm a Levite from the mountains of Ephraim." and the old guy says, "Well, I'm from the mountains of Ephraim too. You come and stay with me." So they came and they went to his house and they drank something that made their hearts merry, and on through the night. So in the middle of the night, the local people, the Benjaminites, come and they knock on the door really loudly, and they say to this old guy from Ephraim, they said, "We want you to send out that guy that's coming to stay with you. We want to abuse him sexually." And they're like, "What?" And so the guy's like, "No, I can't do that." And so he's a guest. I have to look after my guests. It's the honor of Israel that we look after our guests. So he says, here's what I'll do. I have a virgin daughter, and he has a concubine. We'll send them out. Okay, the story gets pretty gross, right? But they're not satisfied with that. No, they want the guy. Like, all right, anyway, it's gay rights in Benjamin. So we can say that, right? In Thailand, right? We're safe here. Gays have the same rights here as anybody else, so we're okay. But they're not. The Benjamites are not satisfied with that. They want the guy. But anyway, so the concubine goes out by herself, and they rape her all night. And she dies on the doorstep trying to get back in the house. So the guys get up in the morning. They're going to carry on their journey. He comes out, and there's his wife, or concubine or whatever, dead on the steps. And he picks her up, puts her on his donkey, and takes her home. And then he puts her on the table, cuts her into 12 pieces, and sends a piece to every tribe in Israel. Somehow that's how you wake up an Israelite, apparently. You send them a limb, or, because Saul did the same thing, remember, with his buffaloes, with his oxen. He killed them, and he sent pieces to every city in Israel and said, "You guys got to come together, and we're going to fight against the Ammonites," whoever it was. And so that really stirs people up. And so they all come then. They come and they join together because they are going to go to war against Benjamin. Remember, when there's no leader, everybody does what's right in their own eyes. And when everybody does what's right in their own eyes, life gets so very, very confusing. And if you have confusion in your life, the problem is a lack of leadership, usually your own. Right? The first person you're going to lead is who? Yourself. If you don't lead yourself, confusion comes to clutter your life. And then you have to make choices and decisions that are very hard to make because they're no longer right and wrong. You're having to go from where you are now, which is a mess, and make some decisions. Somebody's going to get hurt because there's no perfect solution anymore. You've backed off of righteousness so far because you haven't led yourself. And this is what's happening in this tribe of Benjamin. They've backed off of righteousness so far that they want to rape this guy who just came to stay with another guy. And now those guys are going to have to rise up and do something. They ended up killing his concubine. So everybody gets a limb. Every tribe, I don't know, the lady had 12 limbs. I don't know what happened. But anyway, everybody gets a piece. It is pretty gross, isn't it? Like, seriously? And so anyway, the ravenous wolf, that's what happened. So when you get into 19, verse 30, I think it is verse 30, they finally call all of Israel together, and they said, this is a perverted crime committed by perverted men, and we can't allow it to go in Israel. Okay, so now you've got 11 brothers that are going to stand up against one, and they're going to have to deal with him. And so in verse 30 it says, consider it, confer, and speak up. They've heard the testimony. They've got to speak up and come up with a verdict. What are we going to do? We've got to do something. You just can't leave it anymore. It's gone too far. We can't leave this thing leadershipless anymore. So they decide they're going to attack Benjamin. And, wow, that's nice because it's their brother. They're going to attack their own people. So they all rise up. They've got to make a decision. Now, see, they're in a place, and I don't know if this ever happened to you, but you've been in a place where you have a decision that neither one is good. There isn't a good way out of this because of where we've come to, because we slacked off of leading the thing properly back there somewhere. It's happened to me lots of times. If I slack off today, I'm going to make decisions tomorrow that have two bad choices, and you got to choose one. So their choice was to go to war against their own brothers. They gathered all of Israel together, and they said, we will go to war. And verse 8 says, the people arose as one man, saying, none of us will go to his tent, nor will any turn back to his house until we fix this thing. And that's the way that you make a commitment, right? I love that. Israel, they always say, we're not going to bed until we take care of this thing, right? We're not going back to our tent. We're not going back to our house. That means I'm mad now, okay? And so I'm going to do something about this now, and that's a good thing. So in verse 12 and 13, it begins, Benjamin rises up to protect his own people, and he's got 26,000 valiant warriors. Israel, the other 11 tribes, gather 400,000 valiant warriors. Benjamin's guys, listen to this, guys. If this doesn't get confusing, this doesn't just mess up your mind. Benjamin had those guys that were from the cave of Adullam. It says they could shoot a sling with the left hand and be within a hair's breadth of their target. Never miss by more than that much. I mean, man, that's pretty amazing, right? Yeah, we're proud of them, but now we got to kill you because of what you guys did. So the 400,000 come against the 26,000, and guess what happens? The 26,000 win. Seriously? We're trying to stamp out sin in Israel, and the wrong army wins? The guys who committed the offense have now won against the guys who are trying to stand up for righteousness? That's just not right. And something like 20,000, 22,000 Israelites died that day. Not of Benjamin, of the other tribes. So they ask God and they say, God, what's going on here? Shall we pursue again? And God says, yeah, pursue them again. So they get up the next morning and they go to war again. They're now, 376,000 soldiers or whatever. And they go against the 26,000 again, and they lose again. Well, God, you told me. You told me to go after it again. And look at, we've lost another 18,000 men today. I mean, this is amazing. One concubine dies, and you know what happens? By the end of this story, 76,000 men have died because of one stupid knock on the door in the middle of the night by a tribe that runs without leadership. I mean, that's how messy it got. They pled with God, said, God, what is going on? You told us to go, and now another 18,000 people of our people have died, and we're on the right side. We're on the good side. We're standing for righteousness. God, what's going on? And you could see God up there say, well, you know what? You put me in a really tough place here. Because they're my people too. Huh? If you want a title for this sermon, the sermon is How to Fight Among Yourselves. Right? How to fight among yourselves and always lose. Because you'll never win. Even if you're right. And I know that every fight that you've ever been in, with a sibling or with somebody in the church or your brother or your sister, you've been right, haven't you? You wouldn't fight if you were wrong. No, you know you're right. Well, the problem is so do they. And the problem is, to God, we're all God's people. What's he supposed to do? Can he pick sides? I don't know. Like I could see him, lightning coming out of the sky and killing those guys that rape the guy's wife. That to me, that would be a solution. But God doesn't tend to do that, right? Like when I make a mistake, I never had lightning. I didn't have nothing. All I had was silence. Maybe God shouted at me once, "Don't be so dumb." And then after that, silence if you keep doing it. And so God is in a place there, like, I don't know how you talk about God's justice. I mean, who's going to even be able to figure this thing out? It's a total mess. So they go and they cry out to God all day. They fasted and they wept before the Lord. All the other 11 tribes of Israel, they wept before the Lord all day. And then they said, "God, should we go again?" And God says, "Yes, and I'll deliver them into your hand." And so they went again, but Benjamin was amazingly fierce. So Israel had to use treachery, set an ambushment against the city of Gibeah. And so what they did is the army went ahead to attack Benjamin just like they always did. Full force, on face to face. But meanwhile, they sent an ambushment around behind to circle the city and enter the city. And Israel had agreed, the guys that are going to ambush, you light the city on fire, and the rest of us will run away from the Benjaminites like we're losing. That cost them another 30 men. Just for that military maneuver, 30 men had to die. How'd you like seriously? 30 guys have to die? 30 more guys have to die just because of this concubine? And those idiots who raped her? Like, let's just go get them. But 30 more men had to die in the plan, right? In the strategy. And so they run, the Benjaminites chase them, and yeah, we're winning again, third day in a row. Yes, we got these dudes. And so then all of a sudden they turn around and look, and the smoke from their city is rising. And the heart goes out of them. And Israel turns on them. The other 11 tribes turn on them, and they wiped them out totally, except, they chased them here and killed 2,000. They chased them there and killed 5,000. They just kept chasing them. But 400 guys ran to the rock of Rimmon. Okay, that's where you go if you're in trouble. Okay, they ran to the rock of Rimmon, and they stayed there and they hid there. Meanwhile, the entire city's wiped out. Every woman, child, animal, everything, totally gone. So now we have the 11 tribes of Israel have cleaned up the mess. There's 400 Benjaminites hiding out at a rock. They got no city, they got no place, they got no nothing. Israel comes back, and do you think they're happy? Well, for a few minutes. And then they're thinking, do you know what? We've got one tribe is about to go extinct. Reality hits them. The third or fourth or fifth reality, I don't know which one it is, but it hits them that, you know what? What we've done now is going to exterminate a tribe. You've got 400 men. They got no women. They got no kids. They got nothing. They're going to all die in the wilderness, and then we are going to be the 11 tribes of Israel. Well, we don't want that. Because when it comes down to that, we don't want anybody to die, do we? When it comes down to that, we don't want to lose anybody. We really, really don't. We're not built that way. We want to solve problems, but we don't want to lose people. But the problem is that in the middle of solving the problem, they've already lost 75,000 people. And they're all good ones, valiant men. These are men with wives and families and farms. And they're all dead. And now Benjamin is out there. There's 400 of them, and they're stuck there with no future. So Israel's now, they got to come up with another plan. Okay, so what are we going to do? We got to get wives for these guys somewhere. But we swore, when that day we were swearing back there, we're not going back to our tents or anything. One of the things we swore is that we would never give our daughters to a Benjaminite. And we can't go back on our word. You know what? Sorting out justice is a real sticky business. There's layers of it, and it's all intertwined, and it's all gets confused with each other, and it's this justice against this justice. So now they can't give any of their daughters to these Benjamite men because they've already sworn that they wouldn't. And when Israel swears that they won't do something, or they will, they do it, right? So then, now they got a problem. So, okay, somebody came up with a good idea. And that is, was there anybody that didn't come on the day that we swore? Well, it happens that there was. What was their name? It was a city. Jabesh Gilead, yep. And they didn't show up. So then they realized all of Israel came together to fight against Benjamin, and these guys didn't show up. So now they deserve to die. But I think we have a solution. We kill all the men and save the women for the Benjaminites. That'll work. So this is what happens when there's a lack of leadership, Sarah Lee. So they kill all the Jabesh Gileadites or whatever they are, and they take 400 virgins. That's all they got there, 400 virgins in the city. And they bring them and they give them to the men of Benjamin. But there's not quite enough. Well, that's not fair either. I mean, you get a virgin, sorry. We ran out. So they got to find some more virgins somewhere. So, okay, what we're going to do then is there's these really cute girls down in Shiloh, and they come out and dance. So you guys that didn't get a wife, Nathan, you go hide in a vineyard, and you watch the girls when they come out and dance, and you're like a lion, right? And so when you see a real cute one, you run and grab her and take her to your house. All right, and it's okay, because when her dad comes after you with a shotgun, you just say, Pastor Al said I could. We got your back, so don't worry. Huh? It gets really confusing when there's no leadership. I'm telling you. It gets really, really confusing when there's no leadership. Look at, if we had leadership stand up on the first day, if we had leadership in place when an issue arises, if you and I are willing, it's interesting that all through this, the name that comes up, the guy that was the priest that was talking to God about all this, should we go to war, good one, his name was Phineas. Phineas is a really cool guy. He's one of my heroes. He was a guy that during a time when Israel was in the wilderness and they had taken a bunch of, they'd played the harlot. It says the guys had gone chasing these women of these other nations, and they were bringing them into the camp and sleeping with them in the camp. And Phineas grabbed his spear, and he ran up with these two people making out on the ground, and he ran his spear right through both of them, an Israelite man and this foreign woman. And that turned the whole tide. It turned God's heart away from judgment. Thousands died that day as well, but that's what turned the judgment of God away from Israel, is that one guy stood up and did something when nobody else would. And that's your call, is to stand up and do something when nobody else will, and stop the craziness. And we're living in a world where craziness abounds. I mean, it's crazy, crazy, crazy. Stupid, stupid people of every skin and race and education, and the more educated they are, the more stupid they are, the more stupid decisions they are, the more ungodly decisions they're making. Somebody has to stand up and bring sense in every situation, and that's our job. Why? Because we know it. We're anointed by God. We're called by God to stand up and put things in place when nobody else knows what to do. Grab that spear and just run, and God will show you what to do. Don't be afraid to be a leader. But you know what leadership will get you? It'll get you all kinds of criticism. It really will. People will criticize you. Say, "Oh yeah, I don't think he's doing that. If I wouldn't do it that way. You get all that kind of stuff. Don't worry about it. That's nothing. That's nothing compared to the lives you save. It's nothing compared to the sense that you bring in to the body of Christ, to the family, to the ministry, to the church, whatever it may be. Stand up and be leaders. Amen?